It's good to be with everyone again. As Kevin said, I'm going to give an update on recent changes. There's been a lot since we talked on the 23rd of December. So, it's the term of art here is the Economic Aid Act. Before it was the CARES Act. This is the Economic Aid Act that we're talking about. We were on the last time, Mike and I, on the 23rd, which was just based on what the Senate had published. That got signed into law on the 27th. Last week, so the way it works is laws get passed and then it gets given to the agency to produce regulations to implement the law. Those were done last week. So on the 6th of January, 2 IFRs were issued, one related to the Paycheck Protection Program overall, and the other to what are called second draw loans. The important thing to note for those of you that want to either participate in this as a first-time borrower or as a second draw loan borrower, the program or this new law, the Economic Aid Act, extends the program through March 31st for either of those two loans. They're really the same loan, and I'll talk about the differences, but it's the same program, but one is called a second draw loan, the other is called a first draw. Another important thing to note, on Friday the 8th, they issued new application forms for second draw loans and for first draw loans. If anybody needs those, you can contact me. I've sent the second draw loan one to Matt already. They're also available along with some other information on the SBA's website. And then lastly, in terms of dates, they actually have begun taking second draw loan applications this week. Actually, all loan applications this week. Yesterday, the first loan applications are being directed at disadvantaged businesses and certain organizations, and it's going to open up to all businesses at some point this week. I don't know exactly when. So the first IFR, last week they issued two sets of regulations. The first one's called, and I'm going to read from some notes and also address the screen here. So if I have my head down, that's why I'm reading some things. But it's called the Paycheck Protection Program as amended. So this document is a lengthy document, and basically what it does is it consolidates all of this stuff that we've been updating you on since last March and April, all these IFRs and frequently asked questions. They put everything into one document and consolidated everything. And it now is the guidance that you're going to have to look to. Now, most of the original, much of the original rules about this program are still intact, but they added things, as we discussed last time, new categories of costs and some other things. But the idea here is that this new document is really the authority because it consolidates all the interim final rules that were issued regarding eligibility, application origination, as well as provides information on loan increases, which I'll talk about in a little bit, because they've changed the rules as to how these things work. You actually do have an ability if you had a first draw PPP loan, and that's the new term of art, by the way. If you participated in this prior to this Economic Aid Act, that's considered a first draw loan. If you come for another a loan, that's called a second draw loan. So important to note that this is a consolidated document. As I said, they made a lot of changes with eliminating certain borrowers like hedge funds, public companies, private equity firms, but then they also extended it to 501c6 and some other organizations. So there's a lot of things that got changed and added, but added space. Many of the regulations still are intact in the new document. It also says, interestingly enough, is that the SBA intends to issue a consolidated rule regarding all aspects of loan forgiveness and loan review. If those of you who have loans over $2 million know that you have to deal with this loan necessity questionnaire form, and everybody under 2 million has been determined to have acted in good faith in requesting the loan. I believe that what we're going to see is a similar document in terms of regulations that consolidates all the various stuff that's been issued about loan forgiveness. So, that's yet to come, but it is on the way. The other thing, and one of the more substantial things here, which gives rise to the ability of a first draw borrower to go back and change their application, is that this new consolidated guidance allows the borrower to use either their 2019 or their 2020 payroll as a means to determine the amount of your loan. And so they've made enough fundamental changes here that they're saying to borrowers, look, if you were a borrower and you took actions based on what existed before, and now those actions would be different based on some of the changes we made, you can go back and reapply for more money and some other things. So I'll get to that in a little bit. But the ability to use 2019 or 2020 payrolls as a means to either look at your original loan or to get a second draw loan is pretty significant. Most borrowers, I believe, are going to want to use 2019 because many people have had to do layoffs in 2020. So they're giving you some flexibility there. What is important to note here is that the first draw loan program is still in place. It's not gone. So if there's a company on the line here on the webinar who has not done a PPP loan initially, that program is still open and available. The max loan amounts are the same, $10 million. So it still exists through March 31st. And that program is based on 500 or fewer than 500 employees. So it's sort of an adaptation of what existed for people that want to come back for second rounds of stimulus. So the big picture is they've consolidated the rules into one set of rules in one document, and have allowed for people. They made some changes to the base rules, and then have carved out a piece of it for people that want to come back for a second bite at the apple, if you will, for another round of PPP funding. So that was the first IFR that they issued. The second one is specific to what are called second draw loans, which is what we're going to talk about now. So the second draw loans are calculated based on a maximum amount of your loan is $2 million and 2.5 times your average payroll costs, for the period that you choose. And you can choose a 1-year look back from the date of the application. You can choose the entire year of 2020 as your payroll costs, or you can choose 2019 to give you the best answer. So, but it's 2.5 times average payroll. This is a similar calculation to many of you have done already when you did the first draw loan. So if you feel you meet the requirements for the second draw loan, you would do a similar calculation. And remember that payroll costs includes some more categories of things now. I discussed those the last time, but they've included dental and some other kinds of benefits and so forth. So that's why they're allowing people to perhaps go back and reapply for certain things, because they have changed some definitions of what's allowable. So if that's material to you, you have the ability to maybe go back even to your first loan if you choose to go through that hassle. So you do have some flexibility on how you do you calculate your loan. Businesses that are in hospitality, restaurants, it's called NAICS code 72 businesses, which are those types of businesses. The amount of loan is 3.5 times your payroll, still a max loan of $2 million. So here's how this process is going to work, though. It's kind of interesting. So if you're a first round PPP borrower, what you have to realize is they're going to, if you apply for a second round loan or a second draw loan, the maximum for that loan is $2 million, but the aggregate amount of the program is still 10 in total. So if you had a first draw loan of $9 million, to give an example, and you do the math on your second draw loan and you calculate that your payroll says you can get another $2 million, you're going to be capped at the 10 in aggregate. So they're going to look at what you drew down initially, and that overall cap still applies. So there's like an under cap for the second round loan of 2, but there's the aggregate cap of 10 million still applies to these loans. An important thing to be able to, now let's talk about the specifics of how you qualify. Number one, and I'm going to read this verbatim, borrowers have or will use the full amount of their initial PPP loan for authorized purposes on or before the expected date of the disbursement of the second draw PPP loan. So that's pretty important. You have to be able to demonstrate that you fully utilized all of your loan that you originally got as a precondition to being able to apply for one. So if you had an initial loan and you didn't use it for the purposes intended, or you gave some of the money back, you may not be able to apply for this other loan until you remedy that situation. Again, I'll talk about how you can remedy that. But certainly the spending of the money on the proper allowable categories is the big deal. If you did not spend the money as intended on those kind of categories, you may not be able to go back. Obviously, I think an important thing here is that's different this time around than back in March and April of last year was everything was very fluid. Nobody knew what was going on. At this point, the banks have portals set up. They're much more ahead of this. So whatever I say, when you have questions, the person who's going to govern how you do this is going to be your banker. So you want to run any questions by them. So you have to have used the first loan properly. It's for businesses no more than 300 employees. And you have to demonstrate at least a 25% reduction in 1 quarter's worth of revenues between 2020 and 2019. And they did give you the option of just demonstrating if your revenues in aggregate for the whole year are down by at least 25%. You can use that as a basis to apply. So you have to be able to prove that. We've gotten a lot of questions about what constitutes revenues, and I'm going to read or actually gross receipts. So I'm going to read this. Gross receipts includes, by the way, these are in the instructions to the application form. Gross receipts includes all revenue in whatever form received or accrued in accordance with the entity's accounting method. So to me, what that means is if I do my accounting each month, and however I do it, if I have the accounting for 1 year versus the other quarter, that's the way I interpret what they're saying here. But to get back to the definition, gross receipts includes all revenue in whatever form received or accrued from whatever source, including sales of product, service, interest, dividends, rents, royalties, fees, reduced by returns and allowances. So they're really giving you a definition of net revenues because they let you take returns and allowance out of it. The other thing that's important about the test of the 25% revenue is loan forgiveness or idle on a PPP loan or idle loan forgiveness, if you already got it in 2020, does not affect these calculations. It's just your revenues from operating the business. Next topic, good faith certifications. So these are the requirements to meet in order to apply, but remember that the good faith certifications that were in the original CARES Act still apply, that the loan is necessary based on uncertainty, and we know that they gave a lot of definitions about what that means in terms of the effect on the business and access to other forms of liquidity. So even though these tests apply, that these are really whether you're able to apply, you still have to make the good faith certification that the loan is necessary. So, and remember what I said earlier, I'll talk about it in a moment, they are going to issue more loan forgiveness guidance here, I think particularly for second draft loans. So you want to be conscious of that. Like if you're not able to in good faith say that you really needed the money, you got to think about whether you should be applying for this. So we'll talk about forgiveness now. The forgiveness rules that are in effect or that were in effect through all of last year still apply to first draw and second draw loans. You still have the issue of the money has to be spent on the allowable cost. As I said last time we were on here, that they expanded some of those allowable costs, including supplies and cost of goods sold type things. But the important thing is that the 60% of it still has to be for payroll related costs in order to qualify. So you still have to follow all those forgiveness rules. And they are talking about a simplified forgiveness rule for loans below 150,000. You still have the ability to choose an 8 or 24-week covered period for forgiveness. And then here's a quote out of the law. SBA intends to issue a consolidated rule covering all aspects of loan forgiveness and loan review, as well as provide a single reference point for lenders and borrowers. What does that mean? To me, what that means is we're going to get another one of these IFRs. It's going to cover all the loan forgiveness that exists, but it's also probably going to have some further rules about these second draw loans, which we don't know today. How, for instance, if a second draw loan is limited to $2 million, that prior issue of reviewing loans or auditing them above $2 million obviously may not apply. The last thing that is a question we've gotten, and I don't know the answer, I'm just going to refer to it as stacking of loans. So for instance, I got $1.5 million loan before, and now I get another million in a second draw loan. Does that mean that in aggregate, I go above the 2 million and I'm now subject to audit under the program? I don't believe that that's the case, the way I read it, but you want to have your, sort of radar up on this issue. And I believe that we should get clarification of that when they issue these consolidated rules on forgiveness. The last thing I want to cover this morning is just this whole idea of reapplication. So what this says is that because they're letting you choose 2020 or 2019 as your base period to determine the loan amount, and they've also expanded some of the definitions of the program in terms of who can apply and how you calculate some of your costs, they've allowed provisions, which, by the way, they haven't issued these forms yet. If you're a borrower, you can go back and request money back. And there's 4 categories here. The first is that if you returned all of your PPP loan for some reason based on what existed, and now based on these new rules, you feel that you should have that loan, you can go back and ask for that money back. If they already have your application, you can go back and say, hey, we returned it, but based on this, we feel we're entitled to it. We want it back. That's number one. If you returned part of the loan, you can go back and ask for it now. I know a number of companies that tried to game the system a little bit with this $2 million limit in terms of review of loans, where somebody got a loan for 2.2 million and they paid back $300,000 in order to get below the $2 million threshold. Well, the first thing is that doesn't get you out of loan review, because the loan review at 2 million is based on the original amount of the loan. So repaying some of it doesn't help you. But if you feel now that you're entitled, or you actually have been able to use that money within your covered period, you can go back and ask for that money back. And also that might fit into this idea, if you want to get a second draw loan, if you didn't fully utilize what you were given, you're disqualified from a second draw loan if you paid back some of your original amount. So it seems to me that you would have to go back and apply for the amount that you gave back before you'd be able to apply for a second draw loan if you think you're entitled to do so. If you didn't accept the full amount of the loan for whatever reason, you can request an increase based on these change rules. So if you applied for $1 million, but these rules now tell you that you are entitled to apply for more, you can go back and do that. You have to refile. So these forms don't exist yet. And lastly, one of the big changes was initially, if you got an EIDL loan, which is an emergency disaster loan, you weren't allowed to have an EIDL loan and a PPP loan. So if you were given an EIDL loan of say 500,000, that amount was netted when you got your proceeds of your PPP loan. Well, they reversed that. So if you had your PPP loan reduced because of your EIDL loan, you can now go back and request that money back. So those forms aren't issued yet. You want to stay tuned. It's pretty fluid. We have eyes on this. I'm going to give Kevin some links to some of our materials that we've released on our website so that he can share them with you guys. And anyway, that covers everything I've got for this morning.
Mario, that was great, very concise. I do have a couple questions. When we talk about the full use of the first loan, it doesn't mean it had to have full forgiveness, just that if someone met all the permitted uses, they may not have met the 60% to get full forgiveness. Is that right? As long as it's for permitted use.
Yeah, as far as I understand, well, forgiveness is not a qualification of being able to apply for for a second draw loan. It just says that you will have had to use the first loan on the categories intended.
Okay.
Yeah.
And someone asked the question, do the FTE qualifications apply to the second draw loan as well?
I believe so. I believe all that stuff, all that original stuff is now transported into this new program. And I do believe that all those same things are going to apply.
Okay. I had one, let me just try to read this here real quick, a specific question. Someone has investment income from a restricted endowment account held in a foundation that meets related organization. They're saying since it's restricted, would that be, do you think it'd be included in gross receipts and income?
Wow. That's probably a not-for-profit organization. That's a pretty specific question. I'd have to dig to answer that.
Yeah.
What I
Right.
would suggest to the person who's got the question, there is the new application. Again, my general point of view here is the documents that they've issued are better if you feel like reading them. I mean, I spent way too much time reading these 150 pages, but the applications forms themselves are much better in my view because it's not such a rush and everything changing every 2 minutes. So there actually is a pretty lengthy discussion of what counts as gross receipts. But that sounds very specific to a not-for-profit in terms of restricted. So I think the answer is going to be however it gets accounted on your financial statements, because that's what the little definition I read says. Hey, however your financial statements get prepared is probably how it counts.
Yeah, it sounds like that's kind of, you probably want to talk to your accountant or somebody else.
Yeah, you want to get into detail on that.
Okay, had a question here. Let me just read this. So a second draw loan is to cover a new 2-month period of payroll, not the same as before. My understanding is you're using the same period to determine the amount of the loan, the 2019 average or 2020, but it's covering prospective expenses
That's
going
right.
forward.
So, yeah, so when you do your second draw loan, the way you apply is the first draw loan's the same cost, except they've expanded it a little bit in terms of including dental and some other stuff in payroll costs. But yeah, so you can use your prior 12 months, you can use 2020 or 2019. I think most people are going to use 2019. But then once you have it, the same rules apply for forgiveness in terms of you have an 8-week or a 24-week period to spend the money on the allowable cost categories in order to qualify for forgiveness.
Yep. Okay.
So
And then someone, okay, I'm sorry.
I'm saying it's forward looking.
Okay, and someone asked, was there any SBA guidelines on the one-page simplified forgiveness app? Is that in?
Yeah, not yet. They
Not
do state that they're going to issue it. And they also state that they're issuing, I think they're going to issue a whole like consolidating document on forgiveness. And I believe it will be part of that. But they have promised that there's going to be a very short 1 page. It's really going to be like a certification type form as opposed to all the documentation for smaller loans.
Great. Well, Mario, once again, we appreciate so much you joining us on these, very helpful. And if there's, well, like I said, we'll pass on this recording from December and information Mario has. And if something comes up in the future, we'll ask Mario to join us again. Thank you, Mario.
Thanks, Kevin. Good to be with you.
All right.